I was mid-sentence when it happened. The notification slid onto my tablet screen with the cold precision of a surgeon's blade. Marin Blake, employment terminated, effective immediately. Please, exit systems post-pitch. 12 executives from Trident sat across the conference table, their eyes locked on my presentation. The room's acoustics magnified every sound, the gentle hum of the climate control, the occasional tap of a stylus against a tablet, the faint shift of weight in Italian leather chairs. None of them noticed the notification. Only I did. Heat surged to my ears as I paused, barely a microsecond before continuing my sentence about quarterly implementation metrics, as if nothing had occurred. As if HR hadn't just fired me while I was presenting the $72 million deal I'd nurtured for 8 months. And as you can see on slide 9, the integration pathway delivers a 26% efficiency gain in the first 2 quarters alone. I said, my voice concealing everything. 8 months of effort erased in 8 seconds of text. I didn't plead. I didn't storm out. I completed the presentation. When the CFO of Trident nodded approvingly at the final projections, I simply closed my tablet, thanked them for their time, and walked out with the same measured confidence I'd entered with. They assumed silencing me mid-pitch would end my influence. Instead, it destroyed their entire future pipeline. Because what Rivanik's team didn't comprehend was that I'd already created something beyond their reach. My name is Marin Blake. I was 36 and had served as a senior client strategist at Riven for nearly 5 years when they fired me. This is the story of how I lost my job in 8 seconds and how my former company lost everything in the fallout. 3 months before that fateful presentation, I received an unusual request from Grayson Hall, our CEO. He asked me to draft a comprehensive proposal for merging our 3 strategic divisions, something long discussed theoretically but never seriously pursued. I need someone with your strategic mind on this, Marin, he said, leaning back in his chair during our one-on-one. Something visionary, yet executable. You understand the terrain better than anyone. I spent 3 weeks constructing that proposal. It was meticulous, a 78-page document detailing every facet of the merger, from personnel integration to client communication strategies. I accounted for cultural differences between divisions, technical hurdles of merging 3 distinct workflow systems, and crafted a 24-month roadmap that minimized disruption while maximizing growth potential. When I handed it to Grayson, he appeared genuinely impressed. This is exactly what we needed. Let me review it with the board and get back to you. 2 days later, I received an invitation to a company-wide strategy meeting. When I arrived, Lucian 5 was standing at the front. Lucian had joined Riven just 6 months earlier as Deputy Director of Operations, a role created specifically for him after a short stint at one of our competitors. He carried the kind of charisma that drew people in, paired with an ambition that made me instinctively cautious. As the presentation began, I watched with mounting disbelief as Lucian presented my merger proposal verbatim in many sections as his own. My name had been erased completely. In its place, strategic initiative developed by Lucian 5 with contributions from the operations team. When our eyes met across the room, I saw not guilt, but a challenge, as if daring me to speak up. I didn't. Not then. Not publicly. Instead, I gave a slight nod, maintained a professional demeanor, and took notes as if I were hearing it all for the first time. Around me, colleagues nodded, impressed by Lucian's vision. Grayson stood aside, clearly pleased with his deputy's apparent brilliance. That evening, I started a new folder on my personal drive. I named it Altovia Systems. At the time, it was merely a place to store evidence, screenshots of my original documents with metadata intact, email chains showing my submission to Grayson, records of access changes that quietly removed me as document owner. I didn't yet know what Altovia would become. I only knew I had to safeguard myself. The following weeks brought subtle yet undeniable changes. I was left out of email threads where I had previously been a key contributor. Document permissions that once allowed editing were reduced to view only. My name vanished from reporting structures where I had previously held leadership roles. Then came the replacement, a junior strategist named Talia, who had been with the company less than a year. I had actually mentored her when she first joined. Now she was being positioned as my successor before I even left. "We want Talia to shadow you on the Trident project," my direct supervisor informed me. "Grayson thinks it's time she gains exposure to our top-tier clients." I agreed without hesitation. "She's talented. I'm happy to bring her up to speed." What I didn't say was that I had already seen the writing on the wall. This wasn't professional development. This was preparation for my removal. The final confirmation came when HR scheduled a position review meeting with me. Morgan Frist, our human resources director, sat across from me wearing a manufactured smile and holding a folder of documents I wasn't allowed to see. "We're just assessing team structures in light of the upcoming merger," she said. "Everyone's roles are being evaluated." "Everyone's?" I asked mildly. "Of course," she replied, though her eyes flicked away briefly. "Has Lucian's role been evaluated yet?" I kept my tone casual, merely curious. A flicker of unease passed across her face. "Senior leadership positions are being assessed separately." I nodded as if this made perfect sense while fully understanding what was happening. This wasn't an evaluation. This was preparation for elimination. That evening, I activated Phase 2 of what was becoming my contingency plan, using the contract terms I had helped draft years earlier, terms that guaranteed employees continued access to their work product for portfolio purposes. I began systematically backing up critical files to my personal system. These weren't confidential client files or proprietary company information. I was careful about that. These were the strategic frameworks I had developed, the implementation roadmaps I had created, the presentation templates and analytical models that bore my intellectual imprint. All things I was legally entitled to as their creator. I also reached out to two former colleagues who had left Riven the previous year. Ara Jennings from legal and Darian Voss from audit. We met for what seemed like a casual dinner, but the conversation quickly turned serious. "I'm creating something new," I told them after ensuring privacy, "something that will exist parallel to Rivenex for now." But I left the sentence unfinished. Ilara, ever the cautious legal mind, leaned forward. "Are you asking us to help you compete with your current employer?" "That's risky territory, Marin." "I'm not competing with them," I replied carefully. "Not yet. I'm simply building a structure that could operate independently if needed, and I'm doing it within the boundaries of my contract." Darian, who had always appreciated strategic maneuvering, smiled slightly. "You're expecting to be pushed out." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I'm preparing for all contingencies." By the time I walked into that fateful presentation with Trident, Altovia Systems existed as more than just a folder name. It had a legal structure, a rudimentary operating framework, and two trusted associates ready to activate it if necessary. It wasn't a competitor to Riven, not yet. But it was poised to become one with remarkable speed if circumstances demanded. The Trident project had been mine from the start. The global manufacturing conglomerate was looking to overhaul their entire client engagement system, a massive undertaking that would transform how they interacted with customers across 17 countries. I had personally cultivated the relationship with their executive team, identified their pain points, and designed a solution that would revolutionize their customer experience while generating substantial recurring revenue for Riven X. When I arrived at their headquarters that morning for the final pitch, I noticed something unusual. Lucian was there, sitting quietly at the back of the preparation room. He hadn't been involved in any prior meetings with Trident. Grayson explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes that I should observe today for continuity purposes. I nodded, understanding the subtext. They were already planning for my absence. The presentation began precisely at 10 Hazurus. I had rehearsed it countless times, knew every slide, every transition, every possible question. The Trident executives were engaged, asking insightful questions that I answered with depth and precision. Their CFO, notoriously difficult to impress, nodded along with my revenue projections. I was on slide N explaining the implementation timeline when the notification arrived. After completing the presentation and exiting with dignity intact, I walked straight to my car. I didn't return to Riven's office to clear out my desk or say goodbye to colleagues. There was no need. Everything important had already been secured elsewhere. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with messages from confused colleagues who had somehow already heard the news. I ignored them all. This wasn't the time for explanations or goodbyes. This was the moment to execute the contingency that had now become the plan. I drove to a small office I had leased 2 weeks earlier under Altovia's name. Ara and Darian were already there, having received my pre-arranged signal, a simple text reading, "Horizon activated." "So, they actually did it," Darian said as I walked in. "Not a question." "During the Trident presentation," I confirmed, setting my bag down on what would become my new desk. Ara's eyes widened slightly. "They fired you while you were pitching a $72 million deal. That's short-sighted." I finished for her. "And it's going to cost them far more than they realize." Within an hour, we had activated all the systems we had prepared. Altovia shifted from contingency to reality with remarkable efficiency. We weren't starting from scratch. We were simply flipping the switch on something built methodically in the shadows. Meanwhile, at Rivenex, the first tremors of what would become a seismic upheaval began to register. The first came from Trident itself. Their chief technology officer, Ariana Myers, sent an email to Grayson. "We were impressed with Marin Blake's presentation this morning and are prepared to move forward as discussed. Please confirm that Marin will be our primary contact for implementation planning." Grayson's reply, crafted with legal and HR input, was carefully worded. "We're pleased you found the presentation valuable. Our implementation team led by Lucian 5 is ready to proceed with next steps. Lucian will be your primary point of contact moving forward." Ariana responded swiftly. "We would prefer to continue working with Marin Blake, who has demonstrated exceptional understanding of our needs throughout this process. Please clarify if this is possible." This exchange, which I later learned of through remaining contacts at Riven, was the first sign that things weren't going to unfold as the company had anticipated. The next signal arrived when Tridenter unexpectedly postponed the contract signing scheduled for the following week. The official reason cited internal review requirements, but the real message was clear: they were hesitating. While Rivenex scrambled to salvage the situation, I made my first strategic move, sending a simple factual email to Ariana Myers. "I wanted to inform you that as of today, I am no longer with Riven Group. I appreciate our professional interactions and wish Trident success with your customer engagement transformation. If I can be of assistance in the future under my new venture, Altovia Systems, please don't hesitate to reach out. No accusations, no bitterness, just a clear statement of my new professional reality." Ariana's response came within 20 minutes, not to me directly, but via a message to Grayson and the Riven leadership team. "We are putting all contract discussions on hold, pending a full reassessment of partnership options. Please cancel all scheduled meetings until further notice." Inside Rivenex, panic was immediate but contained. Grayson called an emergency meeting with the executive team, Lucian prominently positioned at his right hand. They strategized damage control, crafted persuasive arguments, prepared concessions to offer Trident. What they didn't understand was that the damage couldn't be controlled because they didn't grasp its nature. This wasn't about a better price or extra services. It was about trust and relationships, the foundations I had carefully built over 8 months that they had casually discarded in 8 seconds. A week passed, then another. Trident remained politely distant, responding to Riven's increasingly desperate outreach with vague reassurances. Then came the moment that should have alarmed Rivenex more than anything. Ariana Myers requested a meeting with me at Altovia's new offices. The space was modest but thoughtfully designed. We had leased a single floor in a building across town from Rivenex, furnished simply yet professionally, and established our digital infrastructure with remarkable speed. By the time Ariana arrived, Altovia looked and functioned like a company that had existed for years rather than weeks. "I'll be direct," she said once we were seated in the conference room. "Marin, we've invested significant time in this transformation project, and your understanding of our needs has been the primary reason we were prepared to move forward with Rivenex." I nodded, letting her continue. "What happened?" she asked. "Why would they remove you from our account without any transition or even notification to us?" "I believe Riven is undergoing internal restructuring," I replied neutrally. "They're entitled to make personnel decisions they feel are in the company's best interest." Ariana studied me for a moment. "That's a very diplomatic answer." I smiled. Faintly. I prefer to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. "And what does that future look like for Altovia Systems?" she asked, cutting to the real reason for her visit. "We're a strategic implementation firm specializing in customer engagement transformations," I explained. "Our approach emphasizes deep understanding of client needs, customized solutions, and flawless execution. We're small, but focused, which allows us to be nimble and fully dedicated to the projects we undertake." What I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, was that Altovia could deliver exactly what I had promised Trident in my Riven presentation, because the intellectual architecture behind that proposal had come from my mind, not from Riven Systems. "Would you be able to handle a project of our scale?" Ariana asked the obvious question. "We have the expertise and frameworks in place," I assured her, "and we're structured to scale resources as needed for implementation. What we don't compromise on is strategic oversight and accountability." 2 days later, Trident officially terminated all discussions with Riven and requested a formal proposal from Altovia Systems. When the news reached Riven, the impact was seismic. Grayson called me personally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What did you do, Marin?" he demanded. "Did you sabotage us with Trident?" I informed him calmly that I was no longer with Rivenex. "That's all. They made their own decisions based on that information." "You took our client," he pressed, his voice rising slightly. "They were never your client," I replied. "They were considering becoming a client, and they chose to work with the strategist they trusted to deliver what they needed." "We'll fight this legally," he threatened. "Your contract has non-compete clauses which apply to existing clients, not prospective ones." I countered. "I drafted those clauses. Remember, she understands exactly what they do and don't prohibit." The silence that followed told me he recognized the trap. Riven's own legal framework, which I had helped shape during my time there, had created the very pathway I was now using to establish my independence. "This isn't over," he said finally. "It is for me," I replied, ending the call. The Trident account was just the beginning. Within a month, 2 other major prospects I had been cultivating at Rivenex reached out to Altovia. Like Trident, they were more interested in working with the strategist they trusted than with the company logo on a business card. Meanwhile, Riven experienced unexpected turbulence. Their engagement metrics, how frequently clients access their systems and documentation, showed a sharp decline. Without my ongoing relationship management, existing accounts were becoming less active, less responsive, less invested in the Riven ecosystem. Inside the company, Rumors about my departure had spread, mutating with each retelling. Some said I had been poached by a competitor. Others claimed I had resigned after a disagreement with leadership. No one knew I had been fired mid-presentation, but everyone felt the vacuum created by my absence. Talia, the junior strategist positioned as my replacement, struggled under expectations she wasn't prepared to meet. Lucian, for all his charisma, lacked the deep understanding of client needs that came from years of focused relationship building. The merger of the three strategic divisions, the one I had originally designed, was proceeding, but haltingly. Without the nuanced approach I had outlined, integration created friction rather than synergy. Teams that should have been collaborating competed for resources and recognition. 3 months after my departure, Riven lost another major account, not to Altovia, but to a different competitor. The client cited changes in strategic support as their reason for switching providers. A week later, a third account announced they were re-evaluating their partnership strategy. The dominoes were falling, not because I was actively pushing them, but because Riven had removed the very person who had been holding them in place. Altovia, meanwhile, was growing with controlled precision. We had hired selectively, bringing on only professionals who shared our commitment to strategic excellence and client-focused solutions. Our reputation spread through the industry not through marketing, but through results. Trident's transformation progressed ahead of schedule and under budget. 6 months after my termination, Altovia and Riven found themselves competing for a major new account, a global retail chain looking to overhaul their customer loyalty program. It was the kind of high-profile project that could establish Altovia as a serious player in the field. The final presentations were scheduled for the same day. Rivenik sent Lucian, now promoted to Chief Strategy Officer, along with a team of 4 specialists. Altovia sent me, Lara, and our newly hired Customer Experience Director. We presented second, entering the conference room just as the Riven team was leaving. Lucian's eyes met mine briefly, his confident smile faltering for a heartbeat before he recovered and nodded professionally. I returned the nod and moved forward without breaking stride. Our presentation was everything Riven's had not been: focused, substantive, and precisely tailored to the client's needs. We didn't overwhelm them with technical jargon or flashy buzzwords. We simply demonstrated, with calm authority, that we understood their challenges and had developed a practical framework to address them. We won the account, not out of lingering resentment toward Riven X, but because Altovia was simply better equipped to deliver what the client required. The news sent another shockwave through Riven X. Losing Trident had been dismissed as an anomaly, a client unusually attached to a specific strategist. Losing in a head-to-head competition was different. It was a direct market judgment on the relative value of the two companies. A week later, I received an unexpected message from Talia, my former mentee and supposed replacement at Riven. "Can we meet for coffee?" It read. "There are things happening here you should know about." We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our offices. Talia looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that comes from trying to succeed in an impossible situation. "They're imploding," she said immediately. "The merger is a disaster. Departments aren't communicating, projects are stalling. Clients are frustrated." I sipped my coffee, listening. "Lucian is blaming everyone but himself," she continued. "He keeps insisting the framework is sound, but execution is flawed. Everyone knows the framework itself has gaps that weren't in your original design." "How do they know about my original design?" I asked, genuinely curious. Talia gave a small, knowing smile. "You think people don't talk? Those of us who worked closely with you recognize your thinking. We can see where your architecture has been altered, and not for the better." I considered this. "Why are you telling me this, Talia?" She looked down at her cup. "Because I'm leaving Rivenex. Several of us are, and I wanted your advice on what to do next." I studied her for a moment. She had talent, no question, and she had clearly learned something valuable about corporate loyalty over the past months. "Send me your updated resume," I said finally. "Altovia is growing. We might have a place for someone with your insights." 2 weeks later, Talia joined Altovia as our senior client relations specialist. She brought with her not only her own talents, but also insight into Riven's increasingly desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Grayson had initiated a company-wide renewal initiative, essentially acknowledging that the merger wasn't working. Lucian had been quietly shifted from Chief Strategy Officer to the newly created role of Innovation Director, a position with less client contact and more internal focus. Morgan from HR had left entirely, replaced by a veteran professional skilled in corporate turnarounds. 9 months after my termination, the final blow fell. Riven's board called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Grayson as CEO. Officially, it was strategic differences, but the financial results told the real story. Client retention had fallen 22%, new acquisitions were down 35%, and the company's stock had dropped to its lowest point in 5 years. Lucian disappeared from the company website shortly thereafter. No announcement, no farewell, just another name quietly erased. Much as mine had been from the merger proposal that started this cascade. I didn't celebrate these developments. There was no satisfaction in watching the collapse of a company where I had invested 5 years of my professional life. Many good people still worked there. People who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to my termination were irrelevant. I focused instead on building Altovia into everything Riven could have been, but chose not to be. A company that valued strategic thinking, respected intellectual contributions, and put client needs at the center of every decision. 1 year to the day after that fateful notification slid across my tablet screen, I walked through the main entrance of Altovia's new headquarters. We had outgrown our original space and moved into a full building near the city center. The lobby featured a simple but elegant sign, the Altovia logo, with my name discreetly etched beneath it as founder and CEO. Trident's implementation had been completed successfully, on time and under budget. They had already contracted us for 2 additional projects. The retail chain's loyalty program overhaul exceeded all performance metrics, becoming a case study in effective digital transformation. Altovia now employed 28 people, including 7 former Riven staff who had joined us seeking a more meritocratic environment. As I stood in that lobby, I reflected on the journey. I had never sought revenge against Ravenex. I had never publicly disparaged them or revealed the circumstances of my departure. I had simply built something better, something that honored strategic thinking and client relationships rather than internal politics and credit stealing. In the end, it was far more devastating to Riven than any act of revenge could have been. They hadn't just lost an employee when they fired me mid-presentation, they had lost their future. I was mid-sentence when HR fired me in front of 12 executives. I spent 8 months building that deal. They fired me in 8 seconds. They thought silencing me would destroy my influence. Instead, it destroyed their entire future pipeline because I had already built something they couldn't touch. My reputation, my relationships, my strategic vision. And those things never belong to Rivenex. They belong to me. When I walked out of that presentation room with dignity intact, I wasn't ending my career. I was beginning its next better chapter. My name is Maren Blake, founder and CEO of Altovia Systems, and this is just the beginning of our story. I sometimes think about that notification sliding onto my screen. Employment terminated, effective immediately. 6 words meant to end something. Instead, they began everything that followed. The irony isn't lost on me. In trying to silence me, Rivenex gave me the push I needed to find my true voice. In trying to claim my work as their own, they freed me to create something authentically mine. By firing me during my greatest professional moment, they unwittingly launched me toward even greater achievements. I never needed to fight them, expose them, or destroy them. They did that themselves, the moment they decided I was dispensable while my work was not. All I had to do was walk away, taking with me the one thing they couldn't claim in their termination notice: my mind. Everything else followed naturally from there. 2 years have passed since that day. Altovia has grown to a staff of 43 with offices in 3 cities. Riven still exists, but in diminished form, having been partially acquired by a larger competitor that valued their client list more than their operational structure. Grayson occasionally appears at industry events, always careful to avoid direct contact with me. Lucian has reinvented himself at a startup across the country. His online profile scrubbed of specific dates regarding his time at Rivenex. As for me, I no longer define myself in opposition to them. Altovia has its own identity now, its own culture, its own place in the market. We are known for strategic excellence, flawless implementation, and unwavering client focus, all values I once tried to instill at Riven, now flourishing in soil more conducive to their growth. The lesson, I suppose, is that true power doesn't reside in titles or organizational authority. It resides in the value you create and the relationships you build. Those things can't be taken from you with a termination notice, no matter how abruptly it arrives. They can only be carried forward, transforming from potential energy into kinetic force when the constraints of an unsuitable environment are suddenly removed. I was mid-sentence when HR fired me. I finished that sentence and then began writing an entirely new story, one where I held the pen. That's the thing about trying to silence someone who truly has something to say. The voice always finds a way to be heard, sometimes more powerfully than before. In firing me, Riven didn't end my influence. They amplified it. And I didn't need to utter a single word about what they did. I simply had to succeed where they were beginning to fail. That has been revenge enough. The most satisfying part isn't watching Rivenik struggle or seeing former colleagues seek positions at Altovia. It's building something that embodies my values without compromise, a company where strategic thinking is prized, credit is given where due, and success is measured by client outcomes rather than internal politics. In a way, I should thank them for that notification that slid onto my screen 2 years ago. Without it, I might still be fighting internal battles, trying to change a culture resistant to the very values that now define Altovia. Instead, I am free to lead according to my own vision, surrounded by people who share it not out of fear of consequences, but because they genuinely believe in our approach. That freedom is worth far more than the temporary discomfort of an unexpected termination. So, if there is a moral to this story, perhaps it's this. Sometimes being silenced is the universe's way of telling you that you've been speaking in the wrong room all along. Find the right room, or build it yourself, and your voice will not only return, but resonate more powerfully than you ever imagined. I built Altovia not to compete with Rivenex, but to create what Riven could never become. A company where strategy isn't just a department, but a mindset. Where client relationships aren't just accounts, but partnerships. Where intellectual contribution isn't something to be claimed, but something to be cultivated. That clarity of purpose has been our true competitive advantage. In the end, HR didn't fire me, they freed me. And in trying to ensure I exited their systems, they unwittingly launched me into creating a better one. That notification was meant to be an ending. Instead, it became the beginning of everything that mattered. My name is Marin Blake, and this is my company, built with my mind, guided by my values, and successful on my terms. No one can take that away with a 6-word message. No one ever will.